Well, we talk about this in a new movie. We got a new movie called American Maroon, talking about black people who got up off these plantations and started killing these slave owners and living in the swamps. There's a big swamp in Virginia, North Carolina called the Great Dismal Swamp. That's where a lot of black folks would live after they would escape slavery. Then they would go back and forth from the Carolinas to Florida. Florida was a big maroon colony. They had something called the Seminole War. That was really a slave rebellion, and that was one of the most successful slave rebellions, but they never frame it like that. They frame it as an Indian war because they don't want to give the impression that the government lost to a bunch of black people. Florida had a bunch of black people with gold teeth and dreadlocks beating the shit out of the white supremacists and burning down plantations.
In 1816, the Battle of Negro Fort unfolded in the dense wilderness of Spanish Florida, pitting the United States government against a coalition of Seminole and Maroon forces. The fort, a refuge for escaped slaves and Native Americans, became a focal point for the Seminole Wars. Led by brave African American and Native American warriors, the defenders resisted American forces, determined to reclaim escaped slaves and solidify control over the region. The battle was intense and brutal, with both sides suffering significant casualties. Ultimately, the fort fell to American forces, leading to widespread repercussions. The aftermath fueled tensions between the United States and Seminole tribes, setting the stage for further conflicts and shaping the complex history of Native American resistance in the Southeast.
Honor and respect, greetings and salutations, each and every one. It is another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes. Voodoo Hoodoo 101. Can you hear me good, Toni Val?
Yeah, I hear you coming in loud and clear, Divine. How are you?
All is a blessing, beloved. All is a blessing. Time to
That's
call them
good.
in. It's a Friday night, folks. Folks done got off. What's the song? Just got paid. They about to
Yeah,
go.
Friday night just got paid.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I and Elder Reggie are just returning from our biweekly international New Orleans Voodoo Day meeting. And so Elder Reggie should be here at some point, I'm sure. And beloved Joshua is actually working right now, so he won't be available until probably the last minute, much like he was last night. So if I need to get up and unlock the door, just forgive me. But we do want to pick up our storyline, if you will, about maroon magic and supernatural, and how that then became the African magic and supernatural that then became the hoodoo, conjure, voodoo, obia, root work, etc., that we know and understand today. On the last podcast, we talked about certainly our continued conversation about flying spirits and the power that these spirits could give the enslaved to escape enslavement. But we also talked about the ancestral power and the ancestral connection, the ancestral root really to all of our belief and understanding, nestled within the confines of our hearts and our memories, and those stories that continue to be told even under candlelight, in the whispers of the night, but certainly in the ancestral memory that survives in the blood. Although witches, ancestors, and ghosts are vital to understanding slaves' perception of the world of spirits, it is their participation in the art of conjure that most links their beliefs about supernaturalism to their everyday lives. Conjuration was a magical tradition in which spiritual power was invoked for various purposes, such as healing, protection, desire, and self preservation. It has the means by which the slaves communicate with and manipulate these spirits they are ardently believed while conjure possessed multiple functions, it most salient had to do with the practices of racial oppression. The significance of conjuration as a deterrent against slave owner oppression is ubiquitous in slave narratives, personal testimonies, interviews, and especially folklore. Abolitionist and writer Henry Clay Bruce, who had been enslaved in Virginia, described in his journal a community of slaves that hired the services of a conjurer to prevent their deportation and removal to a plantation in the Deep South. The conjurer's powers, they believed, obstructed the slave owners' attempts to separate them, for at the last minute, the scheduled relocation was aborted. Such defenses against psychological and physical assaults of slavery were essential for many African Americans. Stories of conjurers who subdued whites were almost certainly prominent in the narratives of slaves and former slaves. Clara Walker, an ex bondswoman from Georgia, told of Black witch doctor who punished a slaveholder by creating a mud doll and sticking a needle in its back. In her word, sure enough, his master gone down with the misery in his back, and the witch doctor let the thorn stay until he thought his master got enough punishment. Conjuration, thus, was a formidable and essential component to everyday slave life, if you will. But also, conjuration was the manifestation of Bond's people's supernatural beliefs enacted in their everyday lives. It was the device by which slaves could utilize their understanding of spirits who interfere in their lives to their own benefit. Black Americans utilized conjuration not only because they saw it as a valuable resource for retaliation, but also because they believed that the supernatural realm was a source of empowerment. The story of Old Bab Russ is a perfect example of the way in which slaves have used conjuring to attain a degree of control. The story featured a slave named Bab Russ who used conjure to make any girl love him in spite of herself, no matter who might be engaged to or walking with her. Additionally, a special status was ascribed to these supernatural practitioners who were capable of conjuration. They possessed the most influential and well respected roles within the plantation communities. A 19th century journalist in North Carolina who was writing an expose on plantation life described a bondswoman as a goddess whose slaves believed to be in communication with occult powers, for her utterances were accepted as oracles and piously heeded. Conjuration can thus be understood as invoking the spiritual powers to revise conditions of human existence. Dominant in the depictions of the enslaved use of conjuration and voodoo is the link between conflict and supernaturally induced misfortune. And this is still a component to spiritual work, readings, etc., that we deal with and see coming up even today in so-called modern times. The link between conflict and supernaturally induced misfortune. Most accounts of these spiritual powers of affliction were precipitated by a source of conflict or emotional distress, usually depicting conjure as the source of the trouble. For example, in personal narratives of former slave Hannah Wild, She discussed a story she heard about how a wife became completely deaf and dizzy with headaches because her husband left her while she was pregnant with their first child. The story considers her to have been conjured. This tale, like many others, provides the spiritual framework in which she interpreted her misfortune. A similar rationalization is depicted in the folktale Po Sandy, wherein slave Sandy was turned into a tree because she created a lust spell for a married man. It becomes evident here that the supernaturalism serves as the source of her misfortune. This reoccurring theme that adversity or conflict in one's life reflects supernatural agency is prevalent throughout slave narratives and the enslaved folklore. African American magic exists all around us today and in the past. It resonates in contemporary exhibitions of voodoo in New Orleans, the rituals at African American religious services, and in vibrant artistic forms throughout our museums. Thus, we must try and understand African American beliefs concerning the supernatural and where these ideas originate. Folklore narratives, autobiographies, and interviews have much to say about what magic has meant to the nearly 4 million enslaved people who resided in the antebellum South and forged a distinct culture. Because of their experience of forged bondage or forced bondage and racial persecution, their perception of magic differed greatly from their European and European American counterparts. Rather than inciting common associations of fear or danger, slaves' understanding of the supernatural world served as a necessary escape and espoused notions of supernatural spiritual empowerment. And it also can begin to breathe some degree of understanding of our uh, development in Christianity after being allowed to be exposed to Christianity. Because first we weren't allowed to read, we weren't then allowed to gather, and then subsequently we got invited in to sit, in the basement or in the balcony, separate, from the good Christian, white folk. But then we took on the religion and all of its nuances as indeed our own and infused it with voodoo, hoodoo, conjure, ATR, Aboriginal African traditional spirituality and religious traditions. And so that component of fear and apprehension and fearing God and fearing the man in the pulpit and fearing the man, of the household was greater reinforced by what we refer to here in this space as that great magical spell book that many of you know and understand uh, to be the Bible. So I certainly want to bring in Joshua Nylan Tanner, our co-host, as well as my wild man and first priest, and also beloved Sister Toni Val Martinez. Let's unmute your mics and have you come on in. And certainly we appreciate your support, your love, your donations, your sponsorship, your participation in this powerful platform created for the awareness of NOIVD, New Orleans International Voodoo Day. We continue to encourage you that this is not just an event. We invite you to become a part of something extraordinary. New Orleans International Voodoo Day is a movement that celebrates culture, fosters education, and connects people from around the globe. And so we certainly look forward to co-hosting our Benin delegation as well as our Haitian Creole as well as English-speaking delegation here in this space, and display and share the multifaceted and the global reach of voodoo worldwide as we know it and understand it today. So come on in, Sister Val.
Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? I was thinking, and hello, Divine and Joshua. How are you tonight, Joshua?
Doing good, doing good.
I was just thinking about all the plantation hoodoo and wondering about the mojo bags. I was thinking I would have had everybody with a mojo bag on to
Mhm,
protect them from the masters.
mhm.
But right now, today, I got my mojo working for tomorrow. I want a tropical storm in DC.
Yes, indeed. Now listen, there be mentioned, that mojo bag to protect against the masses. That was certainly documented. And in fact, Joshua and I both, I believe, had roles in the TV adaptation of Roots, I believe it
Yeah,
was. And there
yeah.
was a hoodoo conjure scene, I believe, there where a male practitioner fixed a bag uh, for the mother who was the mammy of the house,
Yeah.
if you will, and for the protection of her family and her daughters. So we know that that type of work absolutely took place. The burying of objects, as well as certainly the cursing at every given opportunity of things that cost money, crops and cotton fields and such. The fires that happened, miraculously and out of nowhere, so attributed to it. So we know that there were, big mamas out there uh, looking like you that was working magic against master and seeking protection for her sons and her daughters.
Oh, yes. Oh, most certainly. And then at the beginning, of the hour, you were running the video about the Seminoles and the we have so much combination of things that came out being hoodoo, New Orleans voodoo. Because we had Seminoles here as well as the Maroons. And like I had mentioned in an
Mm-hmm.
early
Mm-hmm.
episode, we had the Manila men. And one thing that
Mm-hmm.
and they
Mm-hmm.
they a lot of stuff we don't talk about anywhere really is black pirates.
Oh yeah.
And they had a lot of black pirates in the Louisiana waterways that were with Jean Lafitte and other captains that we know of through history. And
Yeah,
they
that's right.
used highly on their type of hoodoo to make them invisible so that no one would see them coming and going. Their boats invisible rather. And I'm quite sure with the Maroon community, like the escaped slaves that were with St. Milo, they combined their efforts in hoodoo, in conjuring.
Yeah.
I know there's no way, nowhere else in the United States that hoodoo is the same as New Orleans. We have such a blend. We had such a vast repertoire to pull from
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It
as
is.
far
Mm-hmm.
as learning that other areas of this country didn't have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
at one time, at the same
And,
time.
and that also explains why I, kind of share more than one experience as it relates to Maroon encampments, because we certainly know more research, more book writing has been done, on Nanny of Maroons, on Jamaican Maroonage, on what do you call them in Brazil? Those who escaped in Brazil and began, civilizations outside of quote unquote civilization. We are still undercovered in this region. We certainly acknowledge Saint John Milo, but we know that he was one, of many more that came before. And I'm noting a pattern of maroonage, pirating, revolutionary activities, uprisings, particularly as it related to men. I think we're seeing a higher degree of lynching, killing, and mutilation in regards to these men, literally and figuratively, in the telling of their stories. And often, Big Mama and the women may have very well been able to survive, to live, to tell some of these stories, for the next day. Here in New Orleans, we sort of over focus on Marie Laveau, certainly for her beauty and her uh, global awareness, of who she was. But certainly she would have been interacting with the pirating that you're talking about now. Some would even suggest, the lucky rabbit's foot, and the Gregory's for luck and gambling was certainly popularized to some degree here in New Orleans, and more specifically, according to Cody Roberts, the author um, of what's the name of the book? Y'all help me. Voodoo Power. Cody Roberts, The Politics of Religion in New Orleans, 1881 to 1940. Voodoo Power by Cody, Kodia Roberts. Voodoo Power, Voodoo and the Power, The Politics of Religion in New Orleans, 1881 to 1940. And he, and certainly you all can gain access to that book. It is available online. Attributed a great deal to sort of the business with an I, Business, the centrality of economics and local culture to business models in New Orleans voodoo. But he certainly draws a line to Marie Laveau in some forms of what we consider commercialization of the practice and the tradition, and then opening that practice, which we still consider a closed practice, to the greater community.
And when you
Yeah.
spoke on the maroon settlements and the men, with the lynching of the men and everything, the St. Milo Maroon settlement is said to be one of the one that had the most women. His settlement was almost equal men and women, and the women were just as fierce as the men.
Hmm. Hmm.
They were pirating too. So
Hmm.
maybe that's why we know more, because like you say, maybe they live to tell a tale of what happened and what the life.
You faded out on me, Tony. I don't know what happened. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You dropped there for a minute, but you're back now. Yeah, and so
Yep.
again, I certainly reinforce the history and the telling of maroon camps and maroonage throughout the Americas, because it holds a great deal of the archive of ancestral memory. Again, as it relates to the acknowledgement and remembrance of those who came before, but certainly the practices and the new adaptations that were now being made in the new world, certainly under the guidance of spirit and ancestors, but also under the guidance of the indigenous people who also inhabited the land, the Black Seminoles, the Battle of Negro Fort, the Florida Maroon camps, and American Maroonage in general. When we consider the geography of the region, Florida practically touches Louisiana when you account for the amount of erosion we've had over the years. But certainly there would have been a clear sandy line connecting Louisiana to Pensacola, to those outer regions of Florida during that time. And the Maroons would have been traveling, as we demonstrated in the St. Milo story, in boats, would have been, capable of navigating from one Maroon camp, one region to another.
But when the Spanish owned Florida and owned Louisiana, it was connected. Mississippi and Alabama, all that
We
was
can't
Florida,
hear you,
West
Joshua.
Florida. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. I was saying the Spanish owned Florida during that time, in Mississippi and Alabama, those Gulf coasts like Biloxi and Mobile, all of that was West Florida, going into all the way into Hammond, Covington, all the way to Interstate 55, if you guys are familiar with the map of Louisiana.
And remember now,
So we know
before
there was a connection.
Napoleon in the Louisiana Purchase, all of that was Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. Well,
all of that on the map was all together.
Mm-hmm.
Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, what we call Tennessee.
And
so the demographics are very different now than what they were in those days.
Yeah, many explorers, French explorers, when the French came in after the Spanish, like the French explorer Louis Alfonso and Antoine, he has a whole diary of day by day navigation up the river, of the Mississippi River, navigating with the Indians, what they did, what they ate, what they went around, like a real detailed description of it, all the way up to Canada. So, like I said, that used to be a highway. The pirates, the boating, all that, the travel, the intelligence to be able to do that, the navigating of that, it was a main highway. The culture flowed through that highway also. So language, traditions, what people did, what people didn't do, or just knowing how to navigate through that. You have to have someone that was familiar with the territory to even get a successful trip.
And you could just imagine, with the closeness of the islands like Cuba, I could just see boats slipping across the waterways back and forth between those islands like they did during Prohibition to run rum, that they were just sending people back and forth through that waterway. And then
Certainly there's a
mixing
lot
with
going on.
them. Yeah,
More than
it was a lot.
a lot of mixing in Louisiana. Like you said, Louisiana is definitely, because of that Mississippi River, I would say it definitely it brought a melting pot of culture, a melting pot of people, a melting pot of influences. Because that was the main way of transportation during that time, and came with that culture and the people, and the language and everything else.
Yes, definitely. Only the strong survive, and we are here today because we are the descendants of a strong people. We are the descendants of the survivors,
That's right.
the ones who took that extra step, who dared to go beyond, who dared to resist,
You're right.
And
who
who
dared
dare
to
to
fight back.
fight and live to fight another day. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, our time is up for tonight. So glad that everyone joined us tonight. Hope you all join us Monday at 9 p.m. And I thought I saw Elder Reggie in the group because I wanted him to close out with some information on International Voodoo Day.
Yeah, I did
But,
see him in the chat, but he never came on board.
oh, okay. Well, I have to turn it over to you, Divine, to close out with the International Voodoo Day information. For
Continue to
those,
visit us at www.voodooday.org, VODOUDAY.org, voodooday.org, for more information and updates about coming events as it relates to our third annual International New Orleans Voodoo Day. I'm going to also close with about 6 minutes of video, more as it relates to maroon camps, maroon in encampments. Um, the Black Seminole Rebellion is about 2 minutes long, and the Florida Maroons. And we look forward to meeting you here again at 9 p.m. U.S. Central Standard Time on Monday night, remembering that all is truly and indeed a blessing. Ashe and Odabo.
So if you live in Florida, all right, there's probably a group of people that you've never heard of. But don't worry, I did some digging and I'm gonna give y'all the scoop. Let's get into it. So if you've heard of the Florida Maroons or the Black Seminoles, then you already know where this video is about to go. But before we dive into that, we have to start at the beginning. So the Paleo Indians were a tribe of nomads that stumbled upon Florida looking for bigger game. So the Paleo Indians decided to settle, all right? They settled like on the south side of Florida, on the east side, okay? And then they migrated north. So as time goes on, this tribe gets bigger, all right? And then they break off into different sections. Let me explain. There's a big climate change, okay? And what we now call Lake Okeechobee, it overflowed into other parts of southern Florida. So when Lake Okeechobee overflowed, it basically started the Everglades. It was everything that that area needed for all of those animals to survive. Now, if we fast forward a little bit, okay, the Paleo Indians started dying out a little bit, and the descendants of the Paleo Indians were the Calusa Indians. Now, the Calusa tribe, okay, they were more vibrant, okay? They were building things, they were really working the land, and things were going really, really good for them. You know, just living their life. But we all know what happens next. Yep, you guessed it, the British came in trying to colonize, trying to check everybody's ID. But you know what? The Calusa Indians, they weren't going down without a fight. They wanted to protect their land. So they fought. They were fighting so much that they just had to have meetings and just come to some kind of agreement. So the Indians were basically forced north. Now, when they went north, I'm not sure the exact location, but it probably spanned from somewhere from like Tampa to Orlando, what we call that now. But they were settling in that area. So the British was like, no, you know what? Now, we want that land too. So they went at them again, but this time they tried to get rid of all of them. But they couldn't, and some of the Indians of this tribe were able to get away, and what they did was they formed another tribe called the Seminoles. Now, this is where things changed a little bit. So we're gonna fast forward a little bit. Now, in the South at this time, slavery is a big thing. We all know this. But what's also a big thing is a lot of slaves were escaping, and they were successful at it. And this is why. So when the slaves were escaping, and not only the slaves in Florida, but apparently the slaves in Georgia and Alabama were coming down to Florida as well. Now, runaway slaves was a big thing, okay? Slave masters was pissed. They would put out warrant ads. Listen, I'm gonna be real with you. Y'all can pause this and read this, but if you black, you might be a little upset after reading this. It's wild. And this is the thing. Once they run away, it was hard to find them because this is why. Let's read this. Americans in Georgia and Alabama were angered by the Seminole acceptance of runaway slaves into their villages. They became members of the tribe. So as the runaway slaves, they living with the Seminole tribe, learning their ways and, you know what I'm saying, mixing and stuff. But things weren't all sweet for the runaway slaves. Just let me explain. All right, so we're gonna go to the headlines real quick. All right, I need y'all to follow along. And look, you can pause this if you want to read the whole thing. All right, but many runaway slaves went to the Bahamas and Cuba. Seminoles living in South Florida traded with Cuban fishermen, relaying slaves to Havana, sometimes for freedom, sometimes for sale. So wait, you trying to tell me that they escaped slavery to be saved and then to be sold back into slavery? Well, they weren't safe nowhere. So we're going to fast forward again, okay? Now, we all know about the Seminole Wars, okay? So when the Seminole Wars were all over, the remaining Seminole Indians were all shipped off to different parts of Florida. And the remaining black Indians, they kind of veered off and started their own tribe. I want y'all to read something real quick. All right, so we're going to go to the headlines just one more time, all right? So the Black Maroons of Florida, also known as Black Seminoles, Seminole Maroons, and Seminole freedmen were a community derived from runaway slaves who integrated into American Indian culture. And look, there's plenty of Black Seminoles still around teaching the culture today, as they should. But listen, if you want to learn more about them, just do your own research. It's very, very interesting, all right? The more you know. Oh, and one more thing before I get out of here, man. Shout out to Renegade and Chief Osceola. Go Noles.
The Black Seminole Rebellion. It started in 1835 and lasted until 1842. 7 years for those of you doing the math. The Black Seminole Rebellion started with slaves in the South rebelling against their masters and rebelling against their keepers. And of course, they were killing their slave masters as they traveled south, picking up more people along the way. The U.S. government, being made aware of this, began to pursue those enslaved, now fighting for their own freedom, people. These enslaved people fighting for their freedom and rebellion had a plan to make their way down to Florida trying to escape. When they got to Florida, they linked up with the Seminole Indians in Florida. The Seminole Indians in Florida and these formerly enslaved people combined to fight against the American government for 7 years. For 7 years, the American military could not conquer these two groups of people. Once it became apparent that this was a stalemate, these former slaves and some of these Seminole Indians decided that the best thing they could do was make their way to Mexico where they would be freed. So they fought their way to Mexico, and even after Mexico, y'all know how America is, they couldn't take a loss. So, but they still couldn't defeat these formerly enslaved people. So the American government and these formerly enslaved people came to an agreement that they'd stay in Mexico and not come back and lead a rebellion, and that the American government will leave them alone. And the document that they signed in order to seal this became one of the foundation documents of another document that will come a few years later called the Emancipation Proclamation. This is our history. This is our story. This is our song.
In 1816, the Battle of Negro Fort unfolded in the dense wilderness of Spanish Florida, pitting the United States government against a coalition of Seminole and Maroon forces. The fort, a refuge for escaped slaves and Native Americans, became a focal point for the Seminole Wars. Led by brave African American and Native American warriors, the defenders resisted American forces, determined to reclaim escaped slaves and solidify control over the region. The battle was intense and brutal, with both sides suffering significant casualties. Ultimately, the fort fell to American forces, leading to widespread repercussions. The aftermath fueled tensions between the United States and Seminole tribes, setting the stage for further conflicts and shaping the complex history of Native American resistance in the Southeast.
Bye.